This entire movie review comes from someone who is not a Star Wars fan. I've watched the original trilogy and I like all of these movies equally. So I watched this movie under the assumption that most viewers who are not familiar with Star Wars will absolutely love it. While I do see kids watching this movie getting their pants excited for things blowing up in the sky, I, as a teenager who is basically also the major target audience for this movie, should be going into this movie liking it. So, what do I think of Star Wars The Force Awakens? Is this really the kind of movie that would mark the awakening of the Star Wars franchise in the movie realms in the modern times? Is this really the one movie that will save Star Wars from the awfully bad taste of the prequel trilogy? Yes! But... Okay, let's just talk about the premise. To be fair, the movie has a fair cast of peoples in unpredictable roles. We're not even sure who is supposed to be the main good guy. I love that ambiguity, which thankfully is kept throughout the whole promotion of this movie. And to be fair, I love how all of the good guys in this movie comes in very different backgrounds with different motivations. First, you have the resistant pilot Poe, and then there's the ex-stormtrooper Finn, and finally the scavenger Rey. You already know that Han Solo and Chewie are the good guys here, so let's not dive in further than that. These three characters have different background stories and motivations of why they're in the movie. It's kind of like starting a new Star Wars tabletop role-playing game, or starting a new game in Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Also another Star Wars product that I really enjoy. I was genuinely interested to see how these characters are going to be significant in the new chapter of the epic Star Wars trilogy. I was even more interested to see how these characters are going to interact with each other. I love the nods that this movie does towards the original trilogy. The title comes in at episode 4 and it explains everything like how every Star Wars media starts ever. That's totally fine. I love the transitions. They make the movie feel so timeless and classic. I love the special effects put on the action scenes. They updated it so that it looks vibrant and beautiful. The sound effects were also very classic because this movie is designed to be nothing but mindless fun. The only thing that this movie does not follow is the still shots because the camera freaking moves. Every single time. Let's get into the issue of how The Force Awakens is pretty much some sort of a parallel revision of Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. I have absolutely no issue if The Force Awakens have the same plot threads as A New Hope. The only thing that I have issue with is that the pacing is not as good as The New Hope. If you don't know it yet, Star Wars Episode 4 is the one movie that you should watch if you want to make a film. Why? Because that movie has the basic 3-arc structure that you can ever think of. There's the action in the beginning, slowing down to introduce the universe, and then finally the climax, etc. This is the most basic movie structure that you can think of. After constructing the plot of The Force Awakens, I end up with this interesting graph of the chart representing the level of excitement. When compared to A New Hope, the graph sure does go up and down pretty frequently. It is quite apparent if you look at it in the intro, where it's nothing but up and down. Now, let me explain why this is the case. I watched this movie at 1 p.m., so not really on the premiere, and I checked on my watch when I start. Literally, 45 minutes have passed, and 4 action scenes have been thrown into my face. I believe some of the Transformers movies have longer breathing scenes than that. So to sum up, this movie is basically A New Hope with a more awful pacing. The only scenes with absolutely pitch-perfect pacing that I can think of was the introduction of all the main characters, because they're incredibly personal and they take time to notice. Poe's introduction is pretty cool and it does establish his character. Finn was a little rushed, but there's still a little bit more development based on his action. The best one was the introduction of Rey, because there's little dialogue and it's just the movie showing what Rey does in her daily life. This shows you that you can tell a lot of what a character's personality like thanks to their daily life routines and their emotions, even without having a single word. Thankfully, the actors who play these roles are pitch perfect on the acting, and it gives quite the emotional weight. Their absolutely spectacular intros make me wonder how these characters would interact with each other. First starts off with Finn and Poe. Their interactions are great, but not much can be seen out of it because action scenes. Then there's Finn and Rey, which is a bit rushed and once again blocked out by action scenes. And okay, wait a second, let me check. Literally no scenes between Rey and Poe. Huh. That's totally weird because in the original, every single character actually get to interact with each other. To add more insult, their interaction has absolutely nothing to do with proper character development, and just either random quips or expositions or even random sarcastic comments. The dialogues are about as deep as a kid's inflatable backyard pool. The lack of interaction between the major characters of the entire movie makes the emotional scenes between the characters incredibly unbelievable, not to mention how incredibly shallow the dialogues are. A well-written dialogue should at least have a good balance between all of these aspects. If you only give character dialogues that are nothing but quips and witty remarks, that's a formula to make an 80s action movie. As much as I love Star Wars to become a badass 80s action movie, you're a space opera first. Also, well-written dialogues cannot be delivered in the pacing of a speeding race car. I'm actually quite baffled because this movie is about 14 minutes longer than the original, and yet they're unable to properly develop all of the characters in that time span. There's absolutely no proper character development, and it's just action scenes one after the other. It's done extremely well when the characters are alone and they're not with anyone, but when they actually interact, in the smallest time that they have to interact, or even not interacting at all, the movie speeds up in an instant, and it feels like it was afraid to show any forms of interaction, maybe intending to keep it for the next episode. When it's afraid, they're gonna continue showing us with more action sequences into the next. Okay, it's a Star Wars movie, and we're supposed to just enjoy the action, but keep in mind that the original Star Wars is not just mindless action. The story is pretty interesting. There's a lot of world building and character development, and they're incredibly fascinating. What I expect from Star Wars The Force Awakens is to properly balance between action and story. However, what I see is the action trumping off the majority of the story, and a whole lot less of world building, which can leave a lot of audiences really confused, not to mention the pacing of a drunk cheetah. In Star Wars, especially if your aim is gonna attract new peoples to the Star Wars franchise, you have to explain a lot of things to the audience, both through showing and telling. Show the more interesting bits and tell some of the details. I can see desperate attempts on the movie doing this, but the pacing is way too fast. Their exposition ends up being unfocused and glanced over. It is so afraid and insecure of losing the audience's attention that they have to distract the boring parts with action scenes. I'm sorry, but people can be bored of action sequences too. Let me tell you why action is getting a bit boring these days. Action is not complex. Most action scenes are nothing but people trying to hit each other or harm each other. If you can make it beautifully choreographed, I'm totally cool with it. If you can make it to be exciting and unique, I'm totally cool with it. What I'm trying to say is your action scenes should be beyond than just people hitting at each other. It has to be unique, clever, and connected into the overarching story. All of the action scenes have incredible special effects on them, but they're way too much, way too close, predictable as hell, and not so unique. There's the action with the lightsaber, there's the action with the blasters, there's the action with the X-Wings. You have predicted this miles away, and what you want is something different and better. Not saying not to include all of them, but tell me how exciting it is when you see that badass stormtrooper taking out that badass riot control tonfa. I mean, seriously, that scene alone got my attention. I've never seen a stormtrooper this incredibly freaking badass. Not only that, but the camera is way too dynamic. If you're gonna move the camera, do it a lot more in the x-axis than the y-axis, because the human head is not designed to go up and down in a quick motion. The reason why people hate shaky cam is because the camera changes the y-axis too frequently. That Millennium Falcon scene from the first trailer was pretty cool, but you have to admit, it's quite disorienting. I'm not gonna say Star Wars The Force Awakens is bad, because it isn't. I can see a lot of people going out of this movie liking it and saying that it is at least better than prequels. I agree on the prequels part, but however, I went out of this movie and ended up not liking it as much as I wanted to. I enjoyed it, sure, but I didn't like it that much. It's mostly because I prefer this movie to be a little bit more slow-paced and take its time instead of keep showering action scenes. If you're gonna do what the original Star Wars did, why not just make it just like that? Why shower us with action scenes when you don't absolutely need to? The original has action, sure, but it also has characters and universe building and all of those good stuff. If you're looking for a mindless action Star Wars movie, then you're gonna get a whole lot more than what you expect from this movie. But if you're like me and you're expecting something a little deeper than that and something like the original Star Wars, you're not gonna get it here. For me, this movie is A 3 star out of 5. It's decent enough to be enjoyable, and I did enjoy it, but not as much as I wanted to. There are amazing things about this movie, no doubt, but I feel that it was trumped off by some of the elements that aren't really bad, but extremely lackluster for the movie. So that's all my review for Star Wars The Force Awakens. If you enjoyed this review, you can go ahead and click the like button and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.